Marlowe glanced briefly at Anna and Finn, who were now sitting together on a nearby bench, their foreheads pressed together as they shared quiet words. "While I understand the sentiment behind your actions," Marlowe continued, lowering his voice, "you cannot prioritize personal feelings over your responsibilities. Do you understand the risk you took? What if someone had questioned your authority because of this?" Alden nodded slowly, acknowledging the validity of Marlowe's concerns. "I do, sir. But I also believe there are moments when doing what's right outweighs following protocol. Today was one of those moments." Marlowe studied him for a long moment, his expression softening ever so slightly. "Perhaps," he admitted grudgingly. "But remember, Captain, the Crown expects unwavering loyalty and discipline from its guards. If you continue down this path, you may find yourself facing consequences beyond my control." "I'll accept whatever comes my way," Alden replied firmly, his voice steady despite the uncertainty looming ahead. "But I won't regret helping that boy and his mother. Not for a second." Marlowe sighed, shaking his head as if unsure whether to admire Alden's conviction or reprimand him further. "Very well," he said finally. "Report to my office tomorrow morning. We'll address this matter then." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Alden standing alone in the courtyard. As Alden watched Marlowe disappear into the crowd, he felt a strange sense of peace settle over him. Yes, there would be challenges ahead, questions, criticisms, perhaps even punishment, but none of that diminished the significance of what he'd done today. In reuniting a lost boy with his mother, he had rediscovered a piece of himself, the part that valued compassion over conformity, connection over control. And for the first time in years, he felt truly alive. Marlowe continued, his tone less severe now. "For now, consider yourself on probation. Your actions will be reviewed, and depending on the outcome of your audience with the king, further decisions will be made. Until then, report to your usual duties. But tread carefully, Alden. One misstep could jeopardize everything." "Understood, sir," Alden replied, rising to his feet and offering a respectful bow. As he turned to leave, he couldn't help but feel a spark of hope. Perhaps this wasn't the end of his career. It might even be the beginning of something greater. Later that afternoon, Alden received summons to appear before the king in the throne room. When he arrived, the vast chamber was eerily quiet, save for the faint echo of his boots against the marble floor. The king sat upon his ornate throne, his piercing gaze fixed on Alden as he approached. Beside him stood Queen Elara, her expression warm and curious. "Captain Alden," the king began, his voice commanding yet surprisingly gentle. "Tell me, why did you break protocol yesterday?" Alden swallowed hard, choosing his words carefully. "Your Majesty, I saw a child in distress and a mother desperate to find him. In that moment, I believe compassion outweighed procedure. I acted not out of rebellion, but out of a desire to protect, not just the royals I serve, but the people who rely on us." The king studied him intently, then exchanged a glance with the queen. After a pause, he spoke again. "Compassion is a rare trait, Captain. Too often, we lose sight of its importance in favor of rigid adherence to rules. Today, you reminded us all of its value." With those words, the king rose from his throne and extended a hand toward Alden. "For your courage and humanity, we commend you. Let this be a lesson to us all, that true strength lies not in power, but in kindness." As Alden knelt before the king, humbled by the unexpected praise, he realized something profound. Sometimes, breaking protocol wasn't just an act of defiance. It was an act of leadership, and in that moment, he knew he had earned not only forgiveness but respect. In the heart of a bustling kingdom, where cobblestone streets wound their way through lively markets and towering castles stood proudly against the horizon, there lived a man named Captain Alden. He was no ordinary man. He was one of the most respected members of the royal guard. Dressed in polished armor that gleamed under the sun, he carried himself with an air of authority and discipline. Every step he took echoed purpose. Every command he gave was followed without question. Yet, despite his reputation as a steadfast protector, there was more to Alden than met the eye. Alden had spent nearly 2 decades serving the royal family. From sunrise to sunset, his days were filled with duties ranging from patrolling the palace grounds to ensuring the safety of the king and queen during public appearances. His life revolved around rules, strict protocols designed to maintain order and protect the monarchy. These rules governed everything, from how he addressed civilians to how he responded in emergencies. To Alden, these guidelines weren't just instructions, they were sacred principles etched into his very being. But behind his stern expression and rigid posture lay a story few knew about. As a child, Alden had experienced something that shaped him deeply: the loss of his mother. She had been his guiding light, the person who taught him kindness and courage. But when she passed away unexpectedly, young Alden was left adrift, forced to grow up quickly in a world that often felt cold and unforgiving. Over time, he buried those painful memories beneath layers of duty and discipline, convincing himself that emotions were distractions best avoided. Despite his aloof demeanor, Alden wasn't entirely disconnected from the people around him. Occasionally, he would overhear snippets of conversations between villagers or catch glimpses of families laughing together in the market square. Each moment reminded him of what he once had and what he had lost. Still, he pushed such thoughts aside, reminding himself that his role required sacrifice. The needs of the many outweighed the desires of the individual, or so he believed. Life inside the palace walls was predictable, almost mechanical. Every morning began with drills, followed by inspections and briefings. Guards rotated shifts seamlessly, ensuring the castle remained impenetrable. For Alden, this routine provided comfort. It gave him structure, a sense of control in a chaotic world. However, it also distanced him from the lives of ordinary citizens. Many viewed the royal guard not as allies but as enforcers, figures of authority whose primary goal was to uphold laws rather than show compassion. Yet, even the most disciplined individuals have moments of vulnerability. Late at night, after the halls of the palace grew quiet, Alden would retreat to his quarters. There, surrounded by dim candlelight, he allowed himself to reflect on his choices. Did he truly believe that following orders blindly was all that mattered? Or was there room for something more, something human? These questions lingered in the corners of his mind, unspoken yet ever present. Little did Alden know, fate had plans to test his resolve. Soon, an event would unfold that would challenge everything he thought he stood for. It would force him to confront the part of himself he had long suppressed, the part that yearned to connect, to make a difference beyond the confines of duty. And though he couldn't see it yet, this moment would change not only his life, but also the lives of others forever. The reunion between Finn and his mother was nothing short of heart-stopping. As soon as the boy heard her voice, trembling yet unmistakable, he broke free from Alden's arms and bolted toward her with a speed that surprised even himself. Anna, tears streaming down her face, dropped to her knees and opened her arms wide, catching him in an embrace so tight it seemed she never wanted to let go again. "Finn, oh my sweet boy," she cried, her voice breaking as she held him close. She kissed his forehead, his cheeks, his hands, every part of him she could reach, as if to reassure herself he was real. Finn clung to her just as fiercely, burying his face in her shoulder and sobbing softly. "I thought I lost you," she whispered over and over, her words muffled by emotion. Alden stood a few steps away, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of relief and awe. The tension that had gripped him throughout the search melted away, replaced by a warmth that spread through his chest. For all the years he'd spent adhering strictly to protocol, this moment felt like something far greater, a reminder of why humanity mattered more than rules. Still, he couldn't shake the awareness that his actions would have consequences. Lieutenant Marlowe's earlier disapproval lingered in the back of his mind, a shadow threatening to darken what should have been a triumphant moment. Anna finally looked up, her tear-streaked face turning toward Alden. Her eyes widened as she took in the armored figure who had brought her son back to her. You found him?" she asked, her voice trembling with gratitude. Alden nodded, offering a small, respectful bow. "He's safe now, ma'am," he said simply, his tone steady but kind. "That's what matters." Tears welled up in Anna's eyes once more, but this time they were tears of overwhelming thankfulness. She rose to her feet, still holding Finn tightly against her side, and approached Alden. "Thank you," she said earnestly, her voice cracking under the weight of her emotions. "I don't know how to repay you. If anything had happened to him—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence, her hand clutching Finn's shoulder protectively. "There's no need for thanks," Alden replied gently, though his own throat tightened at the sincerity in her words. "I'm just glad I could help." He hesitated for a moment before adding, "Next time, try not to let him out of your sight in such a big crowd." Anna managed a weak smile through her tears. "I will, I promise." Then, after a pause, she added softly, "You're a good man, Captain. Thank you for reminding me that there's still kindness in this world." Her words struck Alden deeply, stirring emotions he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Kindness. It was such a simple concept, yet one he'd nearly forgotten in his pursuit of duty and discipline. He gave her a slight nod, unsure of how to respond, and stepped back to give the reunited pair some space. As Anna turned her attention back to Finn, murmuring soothing words and brushing his hair from his forehead, Alden glanced around the courtyard. The crowd had thinned slightly as the royal procession concluded, but curious onlookers still lingered, whispering among themselves. Some watched the emotional reunion with smiles, while others cast wary glances at Alden, clearly debating whether his actions were commendable or reckless. Lieutenant Marlowe reappeared, his expression unreadable as he observed the scene from a distance. Alden braced himself for another confrontation, knowing full well that his superior wouldn't let this incident slide without comment. Sure enough, Marlowe approached, his boots clicking sharply against the cobblestones. "Captain," he began, his tone clipped and formal, "we need to discuss your behavior today." Alden straightened, meeting Marlowe's gaze without flinching. "Yes, sir," he replied calmly, though his stomach churned with anticipation. The kingdom was alive with energy on that crisp autumn morning. The air carried a slight chill, but it did little to dampen the excitement buzzing through the streets. Today was the day of the royal family's annual public appearance, a tradition eagerly anticipated by both nobles and commoners alike. Flags bearing the crest of the monarchy fluttered proudly in the breeze, their vibrant colors adding to the festive atmosphere. Merchants lined the edges of the grand courtyard, selling everything from sweet pastries to hand-carved trinkets. Children darted between stalls, their laughter mingling with the hum of conversation as families gathered to witness the spectacle. Captain Alden stood at his post near the entrance of the courtyard, his sharp eyes scanning the crowd for any signs of trouble. Despite the cheerful ambience, his expression remained stern, betraying none of the emotions swirling within him. Years of training had taught him to remain vigilant, even in moments like these when joy seemed to fill every corner. He adjusted his stance slightly, ensuring his armor gleamed under the sunlight, a symbol of strength and order amidst the chaos. As the clock struck mid-morning, the royal procession began. Trumpets blared, announcing the arrival of the king and queen, who emerged from the palace gates accompanied by a retinue of advisors and attendants. The crowd erupted into applause, some cheering loudly while others bowed their heads in respect. Parents lifted their children onto their shoulders so they could catch a glimpse of the regal figures passing by. It was a scene straight out of a storybook, a moment where the divide between royalty and common folk seemed to blur, if only briefly. Amidst this whirlwind of activity, a small boy named Finn tugged at his mother's hand. His wide eyes sparkled with wonder as he took in the sights around him. The towering banners, the intricate designs on the guards' uniforms, and the majestic horses pulling the royal carriage. "Can we go closer?" he asked, his voice tinged with excitement. His mother, Anna, smiled warmly and nodded, allowing him to lead her toward the front of the crowd. But as they moved forward, the throng of people grew denser, jostling them apart without either realizing it. Finn, now holding tightly to a wooden toy horse he'd received earlier that day, didn't notice his mother's absence right away. Entranced by the colorful decorations above, he craned his neck to see better, stepping further away from where she had last been standing. By the time he turned back, the familiar face he sought was nowhere to be found. Panic began to creep into his chest as he realized he was surrounded by strangers, faces that offered no comfort or recognition. Anna, meanwhile, assumed her son was still close behind her. She continued moving with the flow of the crowd, occasionally glancing down to ensure he was okay. When she finally turned around fully, her heart sank. Finn was gone. Her breath hitched as she frantically scanned the sea of people, calling out his name. "Finn, where are you?" she shouted, her voice trembling with fear, but her cries were drowned out by the noise of the celebration. Unbeknownst to either of them, Captain Alden had already noticed the boy's distress. Standing tall above the crowd, his trained gaze caught sight of Finn's tear-streaked face and the way he clutched his toy horse like a lifeline. Something about the boy's vulnerability struck a chord deep within Alden. Memories of his own childhood flickered in his mind, memories of feeling lost and afraid, longing for someone to guide him back to safety. For a brief moment, he hesitated, torn between his duty to uphold protocol and the urge to step in and help. The decision weighed heavily on him. Protocol dictated that guards should not interfere in civilian matters unless it directly impacted royal security. Yet, as Alden watched Finn wipe tears from his cheeks, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just another lost child. It was an opportunity to make a difference. The question lingered in his mind. What kind of guard, and what kind of person, did he want to be? The next morning, Captain Alden stood outside the grand doors of Lieutenant Marlowe's office, his armor polished to perfection as always. Despite his outward composure, his mind raced with anticipation and unease. He had spent much of the previous night replaying the events in his head. The lost boy, the frantic mother, the whispers of disapproval from onlookers. Most of all, he thought about the look of gratitude in Anna's eyes when she thanked him. That memory anchored him, reminding him why he had chosen to act despite the risks. Taking a deep breath, Alden knocked firmly on the door. "Enter," came Marlowe's curt reply from inside. Pushing the heavy wooden door open, Alden stepped into the dimly lit room. The lieutenant sat behind a large oak desk cluttered with scrolls and ledgers, his expression unreadable but stern. Behind him, sunlight streamed through narrow windows, casting long shadows across the stone walls. "Captain Alden," Marlowe began without preamble, gesturing for Alden to take a seat. "Let's discuss yesterday's incident." His tone was measured, though the slight emphasis on the word incident hinted at his lingering displeasure. Alden nodded, sitting upright in the chair opposite Marlowe. "Sir," he said respectfully, meeting the lieutenant's gaze without flinching, "I understand my actions may have raised concerns. I'm prepared to accept whatever consequences arise." Marlowe leaned back in his chair, studying Alden carefully. "You're aware that your decision to intervene directly contradicted protocol. Guards are meant to maintain order, not involve themselves in civilian matters unless royal security is at stake, correct?" "Yes, sir," Alden replied steadily. "I am fully aware of the protocols governing our conduct." "And yet you chose to disregard them," Marlowe continued, his voice sharpening slightly. "Do you realize the implications of such behavior? What message does it send if members of the Royal Guard begin prioritizing personal judgment over established rules?" Alden hesitated for only a moment before responding. "With respect, sir, I believe there are moments when doing what's right takes precedence over following orders blindly. Yesterday, a child was lost and terrified, and a mother was desperate to find him. My intervention ensured their reunion and prevented further panic among the crowd. If anything, it reinforced trust in the Guard rather than undermining it." Marlowe frowned, tapping his fingers rhythmically against the desk. For several tense seconds, neither man spoke. Finally, the lieutenant sighed, leaning forward with an expression that seemed caught between frustration and reluctant admiration. "Your intentions were noble, Alden. I won't deny that. But nobility alone doesn't absolve you of accountability. You've set a precedent here, one that others might interpret as permission to act impulsively." "I understand, sir," Alden said earnestly. "But isn't part of our duty to protect not just the monarchy, but also the people who serve under it? To show them we're more than enforcers of rules, that we care about their well-being." Marlowe stared at him for a long moment, clearly weighing his response. Then, to Alden's surprise, the lieutenant's expression softened slightly. "You make a compelling argument," he admitted grudgingly. "In fact, your actions haven't gone unnoticed. Word of your involvement reached higher authorities, including the king himself." Alden's heart skipped a beat. "The king, sir?" "Yes," Marlowe confirmed, nodding slowly. "His Majesty heard about the incident and requested a full account of what transpired. Apparently, someone in the crowd mentioned your role in reuniting the boy with his mother. The king expressed interest in speaking with you personally." A mix of emotions surged through Alden: relief, pride, and a flicker of apprehension. Facing the king was no small matter, especially under these circumstances. Yet, strangely, he felt a sense of calm. Whatever happened next, he knew he had acted with integrity. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Captain Alden stood atop the palace walls, gazing out over the kingdom. The cool breeze carried with it the faint sounds of life from the village below. Children laughing, merchants calling out their wares, families gathering for dinner. It was a peaceful moment, one that allowed him to reflect on everything that had transpired over the past 2 days. The king's words still echoed in his mind. "True strength lies not in power, but in kindness." Those simple yet profound words had struck a chord deep within Alden, forcing him to reconsider what it truly meant to be a leader and a human being. For so long, he had equated strength with discipline, duty with unwavering obedience to rules. But now, standing here under the vast expanse of stars, he understood that true strength came from making choices that aligned with one's values, even when those choices were difficult or risky. The meeting with the king had gone better than Alden could have hoped. Not only had His Majesty praised Alden's actions, but he had also used the opportunity to address the entire royal guard during their daily assembly. "We are here not just to enforce laws," the king had declared, his voice resonating through the hall, "but to serve as protectors of the people's trust. Let Captain Alden's example remind us all that compassion is not a weakness, it is a virtue." The reaction among his fellow guards had been mixed at first. Some nodded approvingly, clearly moved by the king's speech. Others remained skeptical, whispering about how Alden's actions might encourage insubordination. Yet, as the days passed, Alden noticed subtle changes in their behavior. A few began offering smiles or nods of acknowledgement, where before there had only been indifference. One guard even approached him after patrol, thanking him quietly for reminding everyone why they had joined the guard in the first place: to make a difference. For Alden, these small gestures carried immense weight. They weren't just signs of respect. They were proof that his decision to act on instinct had sparked something meaningful, a shift in perspective, however slight. He realized then that leadership wasn't always about giving orders or commanding authority. Sometimes it was about inspiring others to see the world differently, to recognize the humanity in every situation. As he leaned against the stone railing, Alden thought back to his own childhood. The loneliness, the fear, the ache of losing his mother. Those memories had shaped him, hardening parts of him while leaving others raw and vulnerable. For years, he had buried those emotions beneath layers of duty and discipline, convincing himself that feelings were distractions best ignored. But helping Finn and Anna had uncovered something he hadn't realized was still there: a capacity for empathy, a desire to connect with others beyond the confines of protocol. He smiled faintly, remembering the look of relief on Anna's face as she held her son close. In that moment, he hadn't just reunited a family. He had healed a part of himself. By choosing to prioritize kindness over rules, he had rediscovered a sense of purpose that went beyond his role as a guard. He was no longer simply a figure of authority. He was someone who could inspire hope, who could remind people that even in the most rigid systems, there was room for compassion. Far below, the lights of the village twinkled like fireflies against the darkening landscape. Alden felt a surge of pride, not for his position or title, but for the impact he had made. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of his resolve. There would always be critics, always those who believed rules should never be bent. But Alden knew now that principles were more important than policies, and that doing what was right often required courage rather than compliance. As the first stars appeared in the night sky, Alden straightened his posture and took a deep breath. He was ready for whatever lay ahead, for whatever choices he might need to make, because in breaking protocol to help a lost boy find his way home, he had found his own path forward. And for the first time in years, he felt truly at peace. Finn's small frame shook as tears streamed down his face, his tiny hands clutching the wooden toy horse like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. The world around him had suddenly become overwhelming, too loud, too crowded, and far too unfamiliar. He called out for his mother again and again, his voice cracking with each attempt, but the noise of the bustling crowd swallowed his cries whole. People brushed past him, their faces blurred by his tears, none stopping to notice the frightened little boy standing alone in the chaos. Captain Alden watched from a distance, his heart tugging painfully at the sight. The boy's distress was palpable, even from where Alden stood. He knew what protocol demanded. He should remain focused on his duties, ensuring the royal family's safety without distraction. But something about Finn's plight struck a nerve deep within him. It wasn't just the boy's tears or the way he clutched his toy. It was the raw vulnerability that reminded Alden of himself as a child. That same feeling of being utterly alone in a sea of strangers. For a moment, Alden hesitated, his mind racing with conflicting thoughts. Helping the boy would mean stepping outside the boundaries of his role. It would mean risking criticism, or worse, punishment, from his superiors. Yet, as he glanced at the other guards stationed nearby, their expressions indifferent to the unfolding scene, Alden realized how detached they seemed from the humanity surrounding them. They were trained to see rules first, people second. But Alden couldn't ignore the pang of empathy rising in his chest. Taking a deep breath, he made his decision. Slowly, he stepped forward, weaving through the throng of people until he reached the boy. Kneeling down to meet Finn's eye level, Alden softened his voice, a rare departure from the authoritative tone he usually adopted. "Hey there," he said gently, placing a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. "What's wrong?" Finn sniffled, looking up at the towering figure clad in shining armor. At first, fear flickered in his eyes, unsure whether this stranger could be trusted. But there was something in Alden's gaze, kindness mixed with understanding, that put him at ease. I can't find my mommy," Finn stammered, his lower lip quivering. "She was here, and now she's gone." Alden's jaw tightened ever so slightly, though his expression remained calm. He nodded, offering a reassuring smile. "Don't worry, we'll find her together. Do you remember what she looks like, or what she was wearing?" The boy wiped his nose with the back of his hand and nodded eagerly. "She has brown hair, and she's wearing a blue dress. She told me not to wander off, but I wanted to see the flags." Alden listened intently, committing every detail to memory. Then, without hesitation, he scooped the boy into his arms, lifting him high enough to see over the crowd. "All right, buddy," he said firmly but kindly. "Let's go find your mom." As Alden began moving through the courtyard, whispers rippled through the crowd. Some people smiled approvingly, touched by the guard's unexpected act of compassion. Others frowned, muttering under their breath about how such actions were unbecoming of a royal guard. Alden ignored them all. His focus was solely on Finn, whose trembling body slowly began to relax against his chest. For the first time in years, Alden felt a sense of purpose beyond duty. This wasn't about following orders or maintaining appearances. It was about doing what was right. As they navigated the bustling square, Alden couldn't help but reflect on how easily he could have turned a blind eye. After all, no one expected him to intervene. But deep down, he knew that walking the way wouldn't have sat well with him. Not today. Not when he had the chance to make a difference. Still, Alden was acutely aware of the risks he was taking. Every step he took carried the weight of potential consequences. Would his actions be seen as noble or reckless? Only time would tell. For now, he pushed those concerns aside, focusing instead on the task at hand, reuniting a scared little boy with the person who loved him most. On the other side of the courtyard, Anna clung to Finn as if afraid he might vanish again. Her heart still raced with a mix of relief and lingering fear, each breath coming in shallow gasps. She couldn't stop touching him, his hair, his hands, his face, as if to confirm that he was real, that she hadn't lost him forever. Finn, sensing her distress, wrapped his arms tightly around her neck and whispered, "I'm sorry, Mommy. I didn't mean to wander off." Anna's tears flowed freely now, but they weren't just tears of sadness. They were tears of gratitude, too. She pressed a kiss to his forehead and held him even closer. "You're safe now," she murmured, rocking him gently. "That's all that matters." Though her voice trembled, it carried a note of fierce determination. She would never let anything like this happen again. But even as she comforted her son, her mind kept returning to the man who had brought him back to her, the guard who had defied expectations to reunite them, Captain Alden. His name echoed in her thoughts, accompanied by images of his calm demeanor and the way he had carried Finn so protectively through the crowd. Anna had always viewed the Royal Guard as distant figures, symbols of authority rather than compassion. But today, Alden had shattered that perception. He had shown her kindness when she needed it most, and for that, she owed him more than words could express. Determined to find him once more, Anna scanned the courtyard, searching for the gleam of polished armor among the fading crowd. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the cobblestones. Most people had already begun dispersing, their excitement over the royal appearance giving way to the quiet routines of evening. Yet Anna refused to leave without thanking Alden properly. Finally, she spotted him standing near the edge of the square, his posture rigid but his expression thoughtful. He seemed lost in thought, staring off into the distance as if weighing something heavy on his mind. Anna hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to interrupt him, but then she remembered how much his actions had meant to her. Summoning her courage, she approached him, Finn still clinging to her hand. "Captain Alden," she called softly, her voice tentative but sincere. Alden turned at the sound of his name, his sharp gaze softening instantly when he saw who it was. "Ma'am," he said, inclining his head slightly. "Is everything all right?" "Yes, thank you," Anna replied quickly, clutching Finn's hand a little tighter. I wanted to say thank you again, properly this time." Her eyes glistened with unused tears as she continued. "I can't imagine what would have happened if you hadn't helped us. You saved my son today, and me too." Alden shifted uncomfortably, unused to receiving such heartfelt praise. "It was nothing, ma'am," he said modestly, though the faintest hint of a smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Anna insisted, shaking her head firmly. "Not everyone would have. You went out of your way to help us, even though it wasn't your job. That kind of kindness, it doesn't come easily to everyone." She paused, glancing down at Finn before adding, "I'll never forget what you did for us." For a moment, Alden didn't know how to respond. Words failed him, not because he lacked things to say, but because the depth of Anna's gratitude touched a part of him he kept hidden for years. Instead of speaking, he simply nodded, his expression softening further. "Take care of him," he said finally, gesturing toward Finn. "He's lucky to have a mother like you." Anna smiled through her tears, overwhelmed by his humility. "And you're lucky to have someone like you protecting us," she countered softly. With one last grateful look, she turned and walked away, leading Finn by the hand as they disappeared into the dwindling crowd. As Alden watched them go, he felt a strange sense of fulfillment wash over him. Helping Anna and Finn had been risky, yes, but it had also reminded him why he had joined the Royal Guard in the first place: to make a difference, no matter how small. For so long, he had buried himself in rules and routines, convincing himself that duty came before everything else. But today, he had proven to himself, and perhaps to others, that humanity and compassion could coexist with discipline. Still, the weight of potential consequences lingered in the back of his mind. Lieutenant Marlowe's warning replayed in his thoughts, a sobering reminder that not everyone would see his actions as noble. As the courtyard emptied and the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Alden stood alone, reflecting on the day's events. He knew tomorrow would bring challenges: a meeting with Marlowe, possible reprimands from higher-ups. But none of that mattered right now. What mattered was the memory of a boy running into his mother's arms. With Finn cradled securely in his arms, Captain Alden moved purposefully through the crowd, his polished armor glinting under the sunlight as he navigated the sea of people. The boy's sniffles had quieted somewhat, though his small hand still clutched tightly to his wooden toy horse and Alden's shoulder. Each step Alden took carried a mix of determination and unease. He knew he was breaking protocol, but the weight of Finn's trust spurred him forward. As they moved, Alden kept his voice steady and reassuring. "We'll find her, don't worry," he repeated softly, more for Finn's sake than his own. He asked gentle questions to keep the boy calm and focused. "What color is your mom's dress again? Did she say anything special before you got separated?" Finn's answers were simple but helpful. Details about her blue dress, her brown hair tied back with a ribbon, and how she always smiled when she talked to him. These small clues painted a picture in Alden's mind, guiding their search. The crowd, however, wasn't making things easy. People milled about in every direction, some stopping to admire the royal procession, while others tried to push closer for a better view. Every time Alden thought he spotted someone matching Anna's description, it turned out to be a stranger. The longer they searched, the more Alden felt the pressure mounting, not just from the difficulty of finding Finn's mother, but also from the growing attention they were attracting. Whispers followed them like shadows. Some onlookers smiled warmly, clearly moved by the sight of a royal guard going out of his way to help a lost child. "Look at that," one woman murmured to her companion. "He's putting duty aside for kindness." Others, however, weren't so charitable. A few older men shook their heads disapprovingly, muttering under their breath about how guards shouldn't meddle in civilian affairs. One even muttered loudly enough for Alden to hear, "This isn't his job. Let the parents deal with it." Alden ignored the criticisms, keeping his focus on Finn. He couldn't afford distractions, not when the boy's wide, tearful eyes were counting on him. Still, he couldn't help but notice the tension building around him. It wasn't long before Lieutenant Marlowe, one of Alden's superiors, approached with an expression that was equal parts confusion and irritation. "What are you doing, Captain?" Marlowe demanded, his tone sharp enough to cut through the noise of the crowd. His gaze flicked between Alden and the boy in his arms, clearly unimpressed by what he saw. "You're supposed to be maintaining order, not playing nursemaid." Alden straightened slightly, meeting Marlowe's gaze without flinching. For a brief moment, he considered explaining himself, telling his superior about the boy's plight, about the importance of reuniting him with his mother. But instead, he chose simplicity. "Sir," he replied evenly, "this boy is lost. His mother is somewhere in this crowd, scared and looking for him. I intend to bring them back together." Marlowe's frown deepened. "That's not our responsibility. If we start interfering in every civilian issue, we'll lose sight of our primary mission. Put the boy down and return to your post." For a heartbeat, Alden hesitated. He could feel the weight of Marlowe's authority pressing down on him, demanding compliance. Yet, as he looked at Finn, who was now watching the exchange with wide, fearful eyes, he realized he couldn't abandon the child. Not now. Not when he'd already promised to help. With respect, sir, Alden said firmly, his voice carrying a note of quiet defiance. Sometimes humanity must come before protocol. Before Marlowe could respond, Alden turned away, continuing his search with renewed resolve. Behind him, he heard Marlowe exhale sharply, muttering something about reporting this incident later. But Alden didn't care. Whatever consequences awaited him, he would face them head-on. For now, his priority was clear: finding Finn's mother. The crowd seemed endless, a maze of faces and voices that blurred together after hours of searching. Alden's legs ached from walking, and the boy in his arms had grown quieter, exhaustion overtaking fear. Still, Alden refused to give up. He retraced their steps, asking vendors and passersby if they'd seen a woman matching Anna's description. Each no stung, but he pressed on, driven by the hope that the next person might hold the key to reuniting Finn with his mother. And then, just as doubt began creeping into Alden's mind, a flicker of movement caught his eye. A woman pushing desperately through the throng, her face streaked with tears. She called out a name, her voice breaking with urgency. Alden froze, recognizing the desperation in her tone. Could it be Finn? She cried again, her voice rising above the din. At the sound of her voice, Finn perked up instantly, his head turning toward the source. "Monty," he shouted, his little body wriggling in Alden's arms. Without hesitation, Alden,